This is episode 89, the largest ecosystem restoration project in the world, featuring the largest ecosystem restoration project in the world, the Everglades Foundation. For our listeners, this episode is not sponsored, but rather a great opportunity to amplify and showcase the prominent work done at this nonprofit and how it can be a case study for restoration on a local and global scale. Welcome to Sustainability Defined. I'm Nathara.
And I'm Cecilia, and we are your hosts. Today we will be talking to the Everglades Foundation, a nonprofit organization, and we will be discussing the wetlands ecosystem and its critical role in Florida and beyond, and just really touching on how this project is setting the example for restoration projects across the world. The Everglades is also a national park, which is key in providing water to a majority of Floridians. It helps build resilience against climate change and storm disasters like hurricanes. And it also showcases what success can look like when you build key relationships between the government, the scientific community, local communities, and beyond.
Right, and we're going to be talking with the Foundation's Chief Science Officer, Steve Davis, about this restoration project, its impacts, and why we all should care. But before we get into the reeds here... What? It's a wetland grass, okay? If I have to explain the joke, then it's probably no longer funny, so let's just get into it.
What is a wetland? Is it a swamp? Is it a giant puddle? Is it a pond? Or is it just really moist land? Let's get into that.
What are you doing in my swamp?
Well, the Environmental Protection Agency describes wetlands as areas where water covers the soil or is present at or near the surface of the soil all year for varying periods of the time during the year, which is a very vague definition. It says like everything and nothing at the same time, but essentially moist land is what I'm going to say.
Yeah. They were trying to fill up the word count there.
Exactly. Me at like 11:59 on my essay.
No, literally.
But when I think wetlands, I think Louisiana, Florida, South Carolina, basically the entire set of Where the Crawdads Sing.
Such a good movie / book.
So good. I've never wanted to live in a marsh more than I did when I was reading that book.
No, me too.
Marsh girl, she slays. But these ecosystems are, in my opinion, the most underrated ecosystems on the planet. All the praise and biodiversity stars usually go to rainforests when we think about biodiversity and all of that, but wetlands are some of the most unsung heroes of climate change resilience. You might think of them as just swamps or marshes, but wetlands are so much more than that. They have a variety of ecosystems which fall under that umbrella. And again, these are the unsung heroes of our planet's ecological health. They act as water filters, flood buffers, biodiversity hotspots, and really powerful carbon sinks. So I don't know, Cecilia, do you know that character that's like always in the background of the movies and like quiet?
You know, like the very demure character, and she's just not like the other girls.
Yeah, like she's quirky, like she's unassuming.
She drops all her books.
Exactly, yeah. She's like always carrying her books. She like reads them in the bus, maybe even on the movie theater. She like helps her dad fix cars on the weekend while like the other girls are shopping for prom.
And she's just so mysterious.
Exactly. And at the end of the movie, she like wins homecoming queen, and everyone realizes just how much she had to offer like the entire time. And the guy like finally notices her.
Oh my god, the best, the most iconic trope we all know and love. I mean, I grew up on this trope with the Disney Channel original movies. They were so good.
That's wetlands for you, you know, like overlooked, under-recognized, full of unexpected talents, truly just like not like the other girls, and honestly should be the main character.
They're so mysterious.
So like mangroves, marshes, peatlands, prairie potholes, like, you know, wetlands come in many forms and quietly work behind the scenes to sustain life on Earth, literally. But they're disappearing at an alarming rate. They're being drained for agriculture, paved over for development, and are just drying up due to like intense temperatures because of the climate crisis. And that's exactly what is happening and what happened to the Florida Everglades. So in this episode, we're really peeling back those layers on this misunderstood umbrella of ecosystems, wetlands, and what makes a wetland a wetland? Why are they so vital? How can restoring and protecting wetlands help us build a more sustainable and climate resilient future? And why are they so moist?
Moisture is the essence of wetness.
It's truly crazy to think about how vital these ecosystems are and just how easily and how much humans have manipulated their natural form and drained, paved over them to satisfy humanity's needs and wants, and just completely altered their beautiful talents of water filtration, barrier protection, and so much more. They're also incredibly diverse, just like you touched on briefly there. First, there's coastal or tidal wetlands. These are found along the Atlantic, Pacific, Alaskan, and Gulf coasts. They are closely linked to estuaries where seawater mixes with freshwater to form an environment of varying salinities or salt levels.
These wetlands have varying water and salt levels due to the tides and mixing of salt water, and this can make it hard for a lot of plants to survive in these types of environments. However, so many of the plants have adapted to these harsh environments, such as mangroves, which are salt-loving shrubs or trees commonly found in tropical environments. So they're definitely living it up in Florida. But mangroves are often the first line of defense in protecting communities from natural disasters like hurricanes. So removing them can lead to erosion and, more vulnerability in those barriers. They can literally make tidal patterns mitigate and not as harsh. So that's how they sort of act as that barrier relief. And they are a real prized nature-based solution when facing increased levels of natural disasters onset by climate change, like we mentioned, and are pretty vital for that flood mitigation piece, but also carbon sequestration and temperature regulation. And they're huge biodiversity hubs, so they really have a lot of benefits.
So why are rainforests getting all the credit here? I mean, justice for the mangroves, right?
Exactly.
And the second category of wetlands are inland or non-tidal wetlands. These are most common in floodplains along rivers and streams or in isolated depressions surrounded by dry land. Think of pothole vibes here. These are the wetlands that are basically look like land has been flooded, and they can be found along the margins of lakes and ponds or in other low-lying areas. These wetlands include marshes and wet meadows that are dominated by herbaceous plants. And yes, swamps are a type of inland wetland. I mean, I think Shrek's swamp was an inland wetland.
Yes, exactly.
They're characterized by saturated soils and standing water and are typically dominated by woody plants like trees and shrubs.
Yeah, definers, those are your types and categories of wetlands. It's important to understand and recognize these ecosystems because they provide tremendous benefits and protection to us.
Exactly. And now back to the Everglades. And definitely please leave a comment on our Instagram if you have been to this beautiful national park. I myself have not made it out there yet, but I would love to make that trip happen soon, especially after speaking with Dr. Steve Davis. He told us so much wonderful stuff about it. And according to the National Wildlife Federation, the Everglades are a subtropical wetland ecosystem spanning 2 million acres across Central and South Florida. So it is a huge national park.
I mean, 2 million acres, wow. And for comparison, this is 10 times the size of New York City, which is about 200,000 acres. So this is a massive ecosystem we're talking about. And you would think something so massive, how do we not see it? How is it not so beautifully preserved and protected, or at the bare minimum visible and noticeable in Florida? I mean, obviously, when you go to Florida, you think about these wetlands, but you don't think about it at this scale, something 10 times the size of New York City.
Yeah.
And you think it would be obvious, right?
It's right next to Miami. I mean, where are the people looking?
Exactly. It's not obvious because historically, the Everglades used to be much larger, connecting many bodies of water all across Florida. But as we always seem to do, humans in the 1800s began altering this landscape and, mainly for flood control so Floridians could build their municipalities.
Like Miami,
right? I always blame Miami.
No, but Pitbull is from Miami.
Okay, you're right. That changes literally everything. Well, yeah, I mean, building Miami and the surrounding cities was a huge part in why this wetland was drained. And this combined with that urban development and the development of the, oh so vital Walmarts and outlet malls that we see, have started to result in the decline of the wetlands, massive loss of biodiversity and beautiful species that thrive here. I mean, the loss of the wetlands was also due to agricultural development because this area has very rich and fertile soil, and that has continued to dramatically decrease the size of this area and this region. So the undertaking of restoring this project is huge.
And with that decrease in size comes a decrease in function that the ecosystem provides. I mean, for example, you talked about how fertile the soil is in this region. And as you continue to agriculturally develop this area and sort of build its capacity for agricultural productivity as the years go on, it makes the soil less fertile, and it also reduces the amount of carbon that this land can sequester, and it reduces the nutrient levels of this soil, and over time it can actually make this area less productive in an agricultural sense. So these wetlands can be very sensitive environments. They are dramatically decreasing the ecosystem with many consequences, like the one I just mentioned. The availability and diversity of these habitats decreases, directly impacting the biodiversity of the area. And each animal here in this Everglades National Park, or really anywhere, has a niche or a specialized job that they must fulfill in this ecosystem. So they have a critical role, and this impacts the overall function of the entire ecosystem. And the overall function is what provides ecosystem services to society, like drinking water for Floridians.
I literally love thinking about species just having their little role, just waking up in the morning and I just
Oh, it's
I know,
so
just
cute.
imagine
Do you think they go to work?
right? Imagine a beaver with a small briefcase just being okay, bye honey, and then he's
and he has his sticks in the briefcase for his dam.
exactly.
No, I love.
He is putting in the work.
The work.
Ecosystems put in so much work. I mean, let's talk about ecosystem services. These are benefits that the environment provides to us as humans. For example, the Everglades ecosystem provides drinking water for almost 1/3 of Floridians and irrigation for much of the state's agriculture. So it's a really important service that this ecosystem provides to Florida and beyond. And the wetlands improve water quality by filtering out pollutants and absorbing excess nutrients and replenishing those aquifers that we need for drinking. And of course, reducing flooding. So I really want to highlight that an ecosystem this big, and really any ecosystem's benefits, don't stop where they're located. The grasshopper effect must not be forgotten.
Ooh, throwback to AP Environmental Science there.
Yes, exactly. I remember this was actually one of the vocab terms that really stood out to me in that class, which I've referred to many people as the gateway drug into radicalizing most environmentalists.
Can you explain that for us, Nathra? What is the grasshopper effect?
I'll put it this way. Ecosystems and our planet doesn't see borders. Borders are man-made creations. So rivers, water systems, forests, they don't recognize the difference between countries and counties. So when water or air is polluted in Florida, these effects can be felt as far as India, right? Maybe not as overtly or point source, but our ecosystems are all connected and transcend culture and country and county lines. And protecting vital places in one corner of the world benefits all corners of the world. So protecting the wetlands in Florida and beyond have critical global impacts and amazing compounding benefits.
Nathra, that was beautifully put. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. Shout out AP Environmental Science. And the benefits don't stop there, definers. In terms of wildlife, it's a huge attraction to a lot of bird watching and ecotourism communities. For example, because there's about 360 species of birds in the Everglades alone, it's an extraordinary place for bird watching and just to observe wildlife in general. Some of the coolest mammals include bottlenose dolphins, which are not endangered and are considered of least concern. But the manatees, personally my favorite in this region, are now considered endangered. One of the most endangered species here, other than the manatee, is also the Florida panther.
That's insane.
Panthers in the wetlands. It's crazy. I mean, that just goes to show how diverse this area is in biodiversity, you know? And there's a lot of beloved species in this area that are not so heavily recognized like the manatees, but a lot of organizations such as the Everglades Foundation is, you know, and others are working hard to restore, protect, and conserve this area.
Collaboration really is key here. And another cool animal that lives here as well are alligators and crocodiles, which you've probably seen all over Florida TikTok if you're on it.
Oh, I'm on it.
No, I don't know how I'm on it, but I'm on it.
Yeah.
And I find these simultaneously, like this species, simultaneously amazing and terrifying, but beautiful, of course. There's grace in terror.
Another graceful terror in this area are also snakes, and I'm sure you've also seen these on Florida TikTok. There's about 27 different kinds of snakes in the Everglades, not counting the invasive species that have come in over the years. And interesting story time here. On my For You page on TikTok, I always see these like super adventurous people swimming around in the Everglades without like any protective gear. They're wearing like a scuba mask and they're just out there. And I mean, kudos to them. They are incredibly brave.
Kudos indeed. So, definers, we've talked a bit about the Everglades history and painted a picture of the current landscape, but we're going to save the details for our interviewee. Let's get into some of the major threats to this ecosystem. Earlier, we mentioned that the Everglades have decreased in size for flood control purposes and urban development. I mean, some of the major cities like Miami are right next door to this oasis. And another main concern for this area are invasive species, like we mentioned. These are plants or animals that are introduced either on purpose or by accident through unregulated home releases, trade boats, etc. So it's pretty common.
And the alteration of this ecosystem, as we have been discussing, is also one of the largest factors as to why invasive species have been thriving here outside of the tropical climate. Due to the alteration of water flows and interruption in the natural pattern of wildfires, invasive species from other parts of the world are taking advantage of the unbalanced conditions in order to establish themselves, whereas native plants and animals are struggling to survive because they are being forced to compete with these invasive species in terms of food or habitat.
Yeah, and 1.7 million acres of the Everglades, out of the 2 million acres that we heard about earlier, have been invaded by these non-native plants. And one of the biggest invaders here is actually the Brazilian pepper tree, which, like, I feel like a lot of times when I think invasive species, I think about, you know, like fauna. I don't really think about flora as much because I'm like, oh, it's just a tree. But speaking of fauna, a big one that is invasive here is the Burmese python, which actually escaped from a captive breeding facility when hurricanes destroyed them, and that's kind of how this population grew. But these snakes can be very secretive and have nearly wiped out most of the small animals in the Everglades, which is, you know, concerning. But on the plus side, I hear they make pretty friendly pets if anyone wants to capture them in Florida.
Oh, I'm not sure if I could keep a pet like that, but again, kudos to the people that can. I mean, these snakes are crazy, and they've also been known to prey on alligators. I mean, these are huge snakes. Imagine seeing a snake swallow an alligator. But let's not get too caught up in the negatives here. Up next, Steve Davis, who will talk about restoration in the area and the importance of it in the Everglades.
That's right, definers. With every challenge, there comes a solution, and restoring these ecosystems help restore native species and provide significant ecological benefits, as we mentioned, as well as those ecological services like clean drinking water for us humans. So let's hear from Steve, shall we?
Okay, definers. With us today is the Chief Science Officer at the Everglades Foundation, Dr. Steve Davis. He is an aquatic ecologist with 30 years of experience in researching coastal Everglades. Dr. Davis earned his PhD from Florida International University and joined the Everglades Foundation in 1999. He was also professor of wetland ecology at Texas A&M. He focuses largely on communicating efforts on advancing Everglades restoration, tracking ecosystem health, and understanding the impacts of sea level rise.
Wow, what a stack of accomplishments. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
The restoration of the Everglades is considered the world's largest ecological restoration project. Is that correct?
It is, as far as I know, and the dollars that we're talking about on the order of 25 billion to restore this South Florida ecosystem, and the fact that it covers 18,000 square miles of South Florida, it's an enormous footprint. It's a huge undertaking, and really we see ourselves as a model for large scale ecosystem restoration.
Wow.
Impressive.
Very impressive. Myself and the definers are quite curious to how you got involved and the restoration work the organization is doing. Could you tell us a little bit about what got you into this project in the first place and what your exact role within it is?
I was fortunate to be able to come to South Florida from Ohio when I was working on my PhD to work in the Everglades. And at that time, in the early to mid 1990s, there wasn't a restoration plan. It was being conceived during that time. So my research was really focused on understanding how freshwater flow restoration would benefit different areas of the coastal Everglades, including Florida Bay. So I felt like I was really on a track that put me where I am today, helping to lead this Everglades restoration effort from a science-based advocacy standpoint. And what we do at the Everglades Foundation is we function like any other scientist. We conduct studies, we do modeling, we publish papers, we collaborate with academic and agency scientists, and the goal is really to not only help advance restoration and do it in a way where it's an eyes wide open approach, where we look ahead to understand what some of the water quality issues might be. We look ahead to uh, forecast sea level rise and saltwater intrusion, climate change, all those facets that really affect the ecology of the ecosystem, but doing it in the lens of increasing freshwater flow restoration, trying to mimic those natural conditions that the ecosystem once experienced before we started draining it. So really, it's sort of steering this impacted ecosystem back to a more natural functioning state.
It's amazing to see how so many organizations, people, scientists can collaborate on such an enormous project and bring it to fruition. So, this restoration project is one of the largest in the world, like you mentioned. Could you tell us a little bit about how it got started and why that was?
It goes back to the early efforts to drain the Everglades. And this really began in the late 1800s. There were federal incentives to drain swampland for conversion to agriculture. And of course, at the time, they didn't understand the value of these natural systems as water recharge sites, habitat,
Right.
water quality, water filtration, ecosystem services that we now all understand as being valuable to society. And so those efforts then continued along with the development of South Florida, which was largely agricultural in the early 20th century. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've got a year round growing season. Again, I'm from Ohio, and there's a very distinct growing season. Well, down here, we can grow tropical fruits, vegetables year round. And obviously, at the time in the early 1900s, feed the North.
Hmm.
And so, winter vegetables, citrus, those types of things, Florida became known for. And so, as that sort of wave of agricultural development continued, of course, the lower east coast of South Florida developed. And the Everglades got smaller, more compartmentalized. And obviously, that's when the impact started to being realized through the 40s, 50s, when the Everglades would burn regularly, when water supplies were limiting during drought. And of course, we recognized this. The scientific community documented it. Everglades National Park had been established in the late 1940s, and they realized more water was needed. And of course, that led to more study on how the natural Everglades functioned, and sort of bringing those points together ultimately led to the development of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan in the 1990s. That was signed into law by President Bill Clinton in December of 2000. And here we are 25 years later, seeing enormous strides made in the building of the infrastructure needed to restore this ecosystem. So it's been a journey that this ecosystem has endured over the last 100 years plus. And here we are now beginning to turn the tide on its health.
Yeah, something that really boggles my mind, Steve, is this concept of draining the Everglades. Like, it's so weird to think about that this was a wetland and we removed the water and then built like strip malls on top. Like, it's just so mind-blowing to me that that is something that humans can do, manipulate the land in such a way. So I'm sure that you, out of all people, have seen the effects of that firsthand. And I'm curious, the Everglades project, you all are not the first stewards of this land. How are you all working with groups that have been native to the Everglades area, indigenous groups, for example, to manage the land in ways that have been ancestrally done maybe in the past?
That's a great observation. There have been habitation of this ecosystem. We have tree islands out in the Everglades. They are literally dry ground surrounded by otherwise wet marsh habitat. And there's evidence of habitation going back to the time when the Everglades was originally formed, thousands of years ago. So, as an example of how we partner with those tribal entities, the Miccosukee tribe of Indians is very engaged in Everglades restoration. They are concerned about water quality. They're concerned about the health of those tree islands that their families have occupied for centuries. And so they do weigh in on these restoration plans and they bring their indigenous knowledge to the table. And in almost every instance, it's aligned with Western science. And the goals of Everglades restoration are about cleaning the water, ensuring that we have sufficient water to keep the system hydrated, but not overly hydrated. And we've had situations where roads have impounded water and leading too deep of water for too long out of the year. And that's been impacting those types of habitats. So it's really working with them over the last couple of years in particular to get some of these projects across the finish line. And by the finish line, I mean congressionally authorized. And ultimately, you need then to go back and get the funding. But it's an arduous process, and having those types of relationships with tribes, with the state and federal agencies, with academic institutions, we're able to really move this effort forward.
Right. And you mentioned the tribal stakeholders as a huge partner. I'm sure a project of this scale, the world's largest, couldn't be done with other partners along the way. Who are the other stakeholders, the major stakeholders that you and your team have to work with? And how do you finance something like this?
Well, so we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We raise our budget every year from individual donors, from foundations and corporate sponsors. We don't take government money. We're sort of the engine that helps to drive this larger effort, which is fundamentally about planning these projects and operating them in a way that delivers benefits for South Florida, and also getting the funding then to go to those agencies, the state and federal partners in restoration, which are the South Florida Water Management District and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we work to get the funding they need to build the projects. So the partnerships and the stakeholders are much broader than people realize, because Florida in general, is known for its beaches, its water, its habitats, its wildlife viewing, its fishing, boating. All of those aspects are critical elements of our economy. And we refer to it as Florida's clean water economy, because that water has to be clean. It can't be polluted. So we ally with groups like the Chambers of Commerce across the state, with the Realtors Associations, because we know property values are tied to the health of this ecosystem. We partner with the boating community, the recreational fishing community, and then, of course, sort of the broader base of South Florida that depends on this ecosystem for their water supply. So those are the key stakeholders, but there are some entities that have benefited from the status quo, and technically they're stakeholders, but they tend to offer more resistance to progress, again, because they've benefited And it's largely agricultural interests that have benefited from a drained, compartmentalized, and suffering South Florida ecosystem.
That's true. There's always trade offs with every project, as I can imagine, especially with one that is of such immense scale. And I'm wondering, what do these projects actually entail? How does one restore the Everglades? How does that begin?
Well, I think first it's important to recognize that restoration of the Everglades and most ecosystem restoration programs, because of population growth and development around this system, we can't take back obviously those lands that we've lost to drainage. But what we can do is restore the functionality of what's left. And it's about 50% of the original footprint. In order to do that, while also providing the necessary services of water supply and flood protection, we need infrastructure, a lot of great infrastructure, which means levees are essential. In some areas, water control structures, pump stations. We've built bridges to help us convey water. So it's not like restoring an automobile back to its original condition
Right.
when it rolled off the assembly line. It's going to be a managed ecosystem in a restored state. And that's important to understand. But the goals are fundamentally based on our understanding of the natural Everglades ecosystem. It's restoring the right quantity of water, the right quality, and then things like timing and distribution are also important. And all four of those elements have been greatly impacted by the way we've drained and managed water in South Florida. So another example is water storage reservoirs, wetlands to clean water. So we're not polluting the Everglades, we're using created wetlands to filter that water for us. So all of that infrastructure is needed to, again, deliver those fundamental services of flood protection, water supply, but also allow us to do a much better job for the environment.
This sounds like an incredibly large nature based solution that provides so many benefits to the people of South Florida, as you mentioned before. And I imagine that restoring the functionality does so through that. So, what have been some of the most hopeful statistics or metrics in restoring this ecosystem function? From your perspective, what is the most exciting thing to come out of this project?
Well, we have enough infrastructure in place now to where we can finally start to see the benefits on the ground and to be able to report on those. And really, this has just been within the past year plus that we've been able to finally document and confidently say this is because of restoration. And it's particularly noticeable in Everglades National Park, where we've constructed 3.3 miles of bridges where the road that was elevated, Tamiami Trail, it's also US Highway 41. Tamiami Trail was originally slated to go from Tampa to Miami, hence the name. But that east-west stretch from Naples to Miami has been a dam across the River of Grass for 100 years. And now with these bridges in place, we can redirect water back into the park in a more natural way. And we're seeing improved hydro periods within the wetlands downstream of those bridges. We know that just over the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen about a tenfold increase in flows going under that segment of bridged Tamiami Trail. So the infrastructure is really helpful in doing that. But getting back to my point earlier of maintaining flood protection for communities immediately adjacent to the park, we've had to implement a new strategy where we were trying to use water levels to reduce the leakage of water out of the Everglades into nearby properties. Now we've installed a cost-effective seepage barrier, which is an underground wall. So they trench along the boundary of Everglades National Park and backfill with a mix of concrete and bentonite clay. And this has created, these are 50 feet walls underground that people do not see, but you absolutely see the benefits of these seepage barriers because the water doesn't freely leak from one side to the other. So we're able, with that sort of containment, um, able to flow much more water across Tamiami Trail. And then the end goal of that is to get it to the finish line, which is Florida Bay, that body of water between the Florida Keys and the peninsula, the mainland of Florida. That is an area that has been desperately in need of more freshwater flow. So the more water we can get across Tamiami Trail down to that end of the state, we're achieving restoration goals, and we're starting to see that.
Wow.
That's awesome. I'm so excited that you can actually see the restoration efforts, and it goes to show how long it takes for a project of this nature to actually reap the benefits.
Exactly. I'll just say that it's really a process of getting the funding needed every single year
Hmm.
from both Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. And we're talking on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars every year needed to get these projects built and stay on track.
You mentioned building bridges earlier to redirect this water flow and provide benefits to the society. I'm wondering, in terms of habitat fragmentation, how have you been able to redirect wildlife in order to maintain biodiversity?
Well, that is certainly an issue. We at the Everglades Foundation come at restoration from the perspective of let's focus on getting the water right first. And in general, many of the species will respond accordingly to that redirected and restored flow. There are some issues, however, where habitats are being lost in part because of the way water management occurred in the past in a way that did not consider the needs of particular species. So we do have a number of threatened and endangered species that have been affected by past management, and trying to steer the system back to a healthier state. We've realized that some of these habitats have been so degraded or are being lost to sea level rise and saltwater intrusion that we may need to consider relocation or opening up new habitat opportunities for those species. So that's certainly a consideration and something that we weigh in on as needed. There are also obviously well documented non-native invasive species problems in South Florida, and
Burmese pythons.
we are literally we are literally a zoo, a haven for non-native plant and animal species. Um, Being in a subtropical climate, there are things from all over the world that flourish here if released into the wild. And obviously, the python is one of the most well documented.
Right.
But we have a number of lizard species. We have bird species. I see, just driving to work, blue and gold and red macaws flying
Oh
through the
my.
Yes.
street. These are birds that have naturalized in South Florida. We have peacocks, peahens throughout many of our communities, iguanas. Just of course, you hear about them falling out of trees when the temperature dips down into the 40s. You go to one of our canals and you'll find a bevy of tropical aquarium fish species that people have released, and now
Yes,
they've
I've
grown
heard about
into
that. Yes.
sustainable populations. So it really is a problem, and it gets back to understanding the implications of releasing plants and animals into the wild and the kinds of change they can incur. And I'll just say
Hmm.
one more with regard to non-native species is that we're seeing an explosion of the Asian swamp eel in very remote areas of Everglades National Park, where they're completely displacing the small native fish community. And that will obviously have implications for things that fed on those small fish, like wading birds, one of the iconic communities of the Everglades ecosystem. So we are certainly keeping our eyes on these invasions and proliferations of non-native species. And as of yet, we don't have a solution for them. We're just trying to provide the ecosystem with the water in the right quantities and qualities, and hope that that helps to give the native assemblage of plants and animals an edge in their recovery.
A bottom up approach.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, I have a strong visual of like a swamp eel and an alligator just going at it. It's crazy. But I did see that there's this TikToker from Florida that he will make recipes from invasive species. So he recently made an iguana egg like Portuguese tart,
Oh.
and it's a little much to get behind right now, but it's a creative approach to to thinking about invasive species. But Steve, I wanted to just circle back. You did mention that you have to go for funding year after year, which is obviously a big undertaking. To be just to, I guess, get right to the point, how is this current administration affecting your ability to access this funding?
Well, we don't know. We are working under the same kind of approach that we do every year, where we obviously have bipartisan support for this issue. We receive strong levels of funding from Tallahassee each year, and we have throughout presidential administrations in Washington, we've seen a gradual increase in funding levels to the point where we're at about 400 million plus per year from Washington. And we're actually taking a more aggressive approach and asking for 725 million over the next 4 years. And based on President Trump's example from his first term, he demonstrated a willingness to move forward with Everglades restoration. He helped us to complete the repairs of the Herbert Hoover Dike. He raised funding levels for Everglades restoration. So we're working on the assumption that that bipartisan support is still there. I'm not sort of working at that angle as a scientist. I try to stay in my lane as much as possible.
Yes.
But it's
Right.
easy to see, though, how Florida benefits from a number of things. And one of the things that we benefit from is that many of the elected officials that live throughout the country, they come here to recreate. They come here. Some of them have homes here, and they understand the value of these resources to the state of Florida. So again, we're unsure yet. It's still early, but we're taking an aggressive approach because we know this needs to be done.
Steve, like that's something that I'm so passionate about. Sustainability and restoration should never be a partisan issue. In fact, it's the one thing that connects all of us. We all share this planet. So it's good to know that it hasn't historically had a large effect on your ability to conduct this project and access funding. And I just want to know, because we didn't get this question from your expert opinion, what exactly is a wetland? And does the Everglades, is that considered a wetland? Is that considered a swamp? How does that work?
Well, there are obviously a number of definitions of wetlands. There's a regulatory definition through the Army Corps' permitting process, but in general, we know that wetlands are areas that retain water for some portion of the year, and the vegetation and the soil condition reflects that. And so there are unique properties that those wetlands, whether they're swamps or marshes, exhibit. And to that point, you asked about what's a swamp. Well, swamps in general are forested wetlands. Uh, there's a negative connotation with that word. People generally think that swamps are stagnant, sort of dark, mysterious places. In the 50s and 60s, there were depictions of the swamp thing and very scary things that live out there. But they're incredibly gorgeous landscapes that, if you just sort of get past the fear and immerse yourself in them, they're really special places. One of my favorite places are some of the mangrove forests in the southwestern portion of the state, like Shark River, Harney River. These are some of the most remote places you can be in the state of Florida, and they're just wild. Tall mangrove forests, you'll find crocodiles, sharks, and lots of incredible, bird watching. But they're all sort of important and tied together because of the various ecosystem services they provide us. And using mangroves as an example, for storm surge protection, shoreline stabilization, water quality, habitat, and how they connect in terms of habitat value to the seagrasses and the corals offshore. It's really incredible once you start connecting those dots and understanding how small fish grow up into large fish, and nesting sea turtles that we have, and crocodiles, manatees. It's really a special place, and we have it here in South Florida. We just need to restore it and protect it for future generations.
That's beautiful. Like, I think that so many times when we think about the wetlands, we think in Florida, we're like man versus wild, like, but there's just so much more to it. And it's just so honestly, like, this is a bright spot of my day to hear about this restoration. And I feel like for so many of the listeners, it will be too, because you guys are doing some amazing work. And I know that there's so much of us that are like, wow, how can we get involved? So, for the definers out there who are passionate about the Everglades and its restoration, is there anything, Steve, that you can recommend that people that might not be native to Florida can do to get involved, or people who are native to Florida?
Well, we're not a member-based organization, but we do have a lot of great information that we share. So I would encourage folks to check us out on the web, follow our social media, sign up for our newsletter. There are a number of member-based organizations in South Florida that span from the blue water offshore to the near shore, and then even inland groups like Audubon and National Parks Conservation Association that we partner with to really help advance this effort. So there are a variety of ways to get connected. We have an Everglades literacy program that's available at evergladesliteracy.org. And this is a program that's really expanded over the last decade across the state and really across the country. And there are even some other countries that have tapped into this freely available curriculum. So if you have kids, are interested in teaching, these tools are available. And then, of course, there are a variety of resources out there as well to become more engaged. One book that comes to my mind is called The Swamp by Michael Grunwald, and it provides a great historical, political, scientific perspective on this ecosystem and the trajectory of restoration. So again, there's a lot out there, and I think if people are interested, there are many ways to become engaged, more than just through social media.
That's awesome. You heard it, definers. If you are interested, reach out to the Everglades Foundation, sign up for their newsletter, get involved. So, Steve, 2 more questions. First, what is your favorite animal or native plant species at the Everglades?
Oh, boy. I love bald cypress. The cypress domes that we have in Florida are just really special, magical kind of habitat, not just from the outside, but also from the inside, standing in the middle of one of those domes. And then I didn't catch the other part. You say animal?
If you have one.
Well, I've actually shifted over the years, and I've increasingly observed this foraging habitat of the bottlenose dolphin in Florida Bay. And it's the only place in the world where they do this, where they sort of swim in a circle and kick up mud into a ring and use that as a means of trapping mullet. And then they use this sort of mud ring to then cause the mullet to become nervous and jump out, and they're outside of that ring waiting to catch them in their mouth. And it's just
so strategic.
I saw this last Monday,
Smart.
and it makes you realize that not only are these really incredibly intelligent organisms, but they're able to pass that knowledge from generation to generation. And again, this is, I think there's only one other place where this has been documented in bottlenose dolphin, but it's really special.
That's amazing.
Something about those Florida dolphins, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So the next question is a question that we ask everyone that we interview here at the podcast. It's the party fact question. So it's more of like, if I'm at a party or I'm at a gathering and I want to share a party fact about the Everglades, what would that party fact be?
Something that's gonna like really have everyone being like, what?
Yes.
I had no idea.
They're going to be shocked.
Well, you mentioned earlier about it being the largest ecosystem restoration program in the world. And I think that's, for me, one of the most compelling facts, but I think it's also important to know that 9 million Floridians depend on this ecosystem for their water supply. And in South Florida, we benefit from upwards of 5 feet of rain every single year. This is the ecosystem that used to manage that water. And now we need to make sure that we protect as much of that water and provide it to the ecosystem, because we benefit from that as well.
That's so impressive. That's a good party fact. I will be using that for sure. And
All right.
I've never been to the Everglades. You've truly inspired me to go visit this wild zoo that's in the South Florida region.
Yeah.
The tropical zoo.
Airboat trips are great.
Mm-hmm.
We just want to thank you so much, Steve, for the work that you do, because I don't know, the entire time my mind was just going to the scale of this project is crazy. At my university, the University of Georgia, it took us, I think, about 2 decades to restore one lake on campus called Lake Herrick. Shout out Lake Herrick. It had a sewage issue. But like I'm thinking about how that took 20 years, and you guys are restoring an entire ecosystem that's covering like almost the bottom half of like, this is amazing. So I
Truly.
just want to like really shout out you and your team and this foundation for just doing incredible work year after year. And thank you so much for being on Sustainability Defined.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Definers, thanks for sticking around. We heard some interesting insights from Dr. Steve Davis, and now we will transition into our takeaways and broad generalizations that we can get from this episode.
And a quick shout out to the people that make this episode happen, the Sustainability Defined team and the team over at the Everglades Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's dive into our takeaways. Definers, what did you learn today? Please feel free to comment on our Instagram, LinkedIn, at Sustainability Defined with any cool things you learned about, questions, or anything else.
Yes, please reach out to us. And again, DM us with your sustainability stories, questions, journeys, and hardships to be anonymously featured in our episodes. We want to shout you out, Definers. We are all in this together. Just like Dr. Davis mentioned, collaboration is key. Yeah, collaboration is key, and we want to collaborate with our listeners.
We learned about the world's largest restoration project today, the finances involved, the stakeholders, and the politics. And here's what we've gathered from this topic that can be generalized in your everyday lives and your work lives. Number 1, it is important to include all stakeholders in the decision-making process in order to have the most effective project to reach your end goal. That collaboration piece is really key here. So sitting down with the various stakeholders, understanding their concerns, their needs, their abilities to contribute, these are all important.
Number 2, we learned that change takes time, and it's important to be patient, be courageous, be confident, and be involved in order to make that change happen. So stay curious and ask questions.
There are multiple ways to get involved with this project specifically. Check out the evergladesfoundation.org for more information on how to get involved, maybe as a volunteer, sign up for their newsletter, visit the Everglades as a nice little trip, donate to their cause, and raise awareness. Number 3, another takeaway. With every complex problem, there is a creative solution with a multitude of co-benefits. Ask questions, stay creative, and get engaged.
Well, Definers, we hope you enjoyed this episode on the world's largest restoration project. Follow us on Instagram at Sustainability Defined to keep up with us. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Netra. I mean, what?
I love that. And I'm Cecilia. And this has been Sustainability Defined.
Stop, I read your name on the paper.